again, everyone. Welcome back to our journey through Western music history. Before we jump into today's exciting topic, Baroque music and the genius of J.S. Bach, let's take a moment to review what we've learned so far. In our last few lessons, we traveled through the medieval period where music was deeply connected to the church. We explored Gregorian chant, those calm, monophonic melodies sung by monks, and learned about the birth of musical notation using neumes. Remember? And do you remember how music back then had no clear rhythm, no harmony, just a single floating melody? Then we moved into the Renaissance, a time of balance, beauty, and intellectual curiosity. And we heard how polyphony developed with many independent voices moving and weaving together, right? And we met composers like Josquin des Prez, Palestrina, and heard how secular music grew alongside sacred music. So let's quickly review with a few questions. You can just say the answers out loud or think them to yourself. Question number one. What does polyphony mean? Right? Many independent melodies happening at the same time. Question number two. Do you know what is the difference between sacred and secular music? Sacred is for worship, mostly in churches, and secular is for entertainment, songs, dances, even love poems. So, great job. You've learned so much already. Now, today, stepping into a whole new world, whole new sound world, the Baroque era. That word Baroque comes from a Portuguese term meaning irregular pearl, something elaborate, dramatic, and ornate. So we'll learn what made Baroque music so different, not just in how it sounded, but in what it meant to people. Are you ready? Let's begin our exploration of the Baroque period. Okay. Now that we've just warmed up, let's begin our deep dive into the Baroque era, one of the most exciting and dramatic periods in music history. So, what does the word Baroque actually mean? Well, it comes from the Portuguese word barroco, which means misshapen pearl. Isn't that strange? Look at these misshapen pearls, ugly pearls. Isn't that strange? A misshapen pearl? Actually, this word come from people in later centuries than Baroque period. So people, scholars in later centuries use the word to describe Baroque art and architecture because it looked overly decorated and very detailed. So the word Baroque became a way to describe anything that felt dramatic, extravagant, or emotional. But now we use it more proudly, rather proudly, to describe one of the most powerful and expressive time in music. Okay, so let's start with some important dates. The Baroque period lasted from about 1600 to 1750, right around the time when Europe was full of kings and queens and powerful churches and exciting new discoveries here and there. Okay, can you picture like this? like over there. Huge palace with golden ceilings and giant chandeliers. That's the style of the Baroque. It was rich, dramatic, and filled with powerful emotion. So, what was happening in the world during this time? Let's talk through a few big ideas. What was happening in the world? First, during the Baroque era, many European countries were ruled by absolute monarchs. So, kings and queens who had the total control over everything, over the country, over the policies. Yeah. So, one famous example, this king, is King Louis XIV of France. He called himself the Sun King and built a giant place at Versailles in France, filled with art, music, dancing, and feasts. So kings and nobles loved to show off their power, and so music became a big part of that, showing off their power. So they hired composers and musicians to perform in their royal courts. I mean, in their houses, in their big houses. So music was no longer just for the church. It was now a way to show wealth, how you live well, how you are well off, and how way to show their power. The power of the church. Even though royalty, those people, were strong, the Catholic Church also remained very powerful, especially in countries like Italy and Spain. In fact, the church used music to inspire emotion, drama, and devotion, commitment to the gods. So, have you ever walked into a giant cathedral like this with echoes, stained glass, and organ music? That's the kind of powerful atmosphere Baroque composers were writing for. So, whether it was in a palace or a cathedral, Baroque music was meant to move people deeply. Scientific revolution. Another big change happened in Europe. People were starting to explore the world differently through science and reason, through thinking. So, think about people like Galileo and Newton. They were discovering how planets moved, how gravity works, and how to understand nature through observation, through looking and thinking about it. Oh, why this happened? Why this happened? Why does this happen? Through thinking. So, this same sense of order and structure also appeared in music. So, Baroque music often follows patterns, rules, and contrasts. It can feel like a beautifully organized machine, emotional but also controlled. New inventions and ideas. Let's not forget about other important changes. So, the printing press, which was invented in the Renaissance, was now being used to spread music to people much, much faster. So composers were becoming famous all across Europe because people could now buy printed sheet music and perform it at home. And new instruments like the violin, harpsichord, and pipe organ were becoming more popular and more advanced. More like advanced things in their instruments were invented and developed. So let's summarize what we've learned so far. The the Baroque era lasted from 1600 to 1750, and it was a time of kings, cathedrals, and new discoveries. Music was used to show power, emotion, and drama. Both the church and royal courts were major centers of music, remember? And last, scientific thinking influenced the structure and patterns in music. Okay, let's move on. So now that we understand the world that Baroque music was born into, full of royal courts, cathedrals, new discoveries, like scientific revolution and emotion. So let's take a closer look at the music itself. Okay? What does it sound like? What makes it different from before? What makes it different from the music in the Renaissance? And who are the great composers who shaped it? Let's dive in. So let's talk about the key features, key characteristics of the Baroque music. Let's break down the sound of Baroque music. First, Baroque music had strong contrast between loud and soft, or in terms of number, solo versus group. Yeah. So later we'll talk about the concerto, where the solo instrument and the others, the orchestra, performs together, like competing with each other. And basso continuo. Basso continuo is having a steady bass line, often played by a cello and harpsichord. And then above that, other instruments could play. Third, more use of homophony. So before in the Renaissance, the polyphony, the independent lines weaving, polyphony music was more strong. But into the Baroque music, there are more use of homophony. So homophony is having the clear melody and having the accompaniment. Yeah. So having like a separate group of melody and its accompaniment is homophony. Okay. And four, greater use of instruments. So the music is moving into the realm of instrumental music. Before, vocal music was much more strong, but we're moving into uh, greater use of instrumental music, like violin, harpsichord, organ, and something, da 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 da, trumpet, and something. So those instrumental music is getting stronger. So piano, I mean the harpsichord, violin, and other instrument gets to play as a solo instrument, not the accompaniment for the voices. Okay. And one of the key features is ornamentation. There are a lot of embellishments, trills, fast notes, and fast scales to embellish notes. And lastly, emotion and drama. So music should express a feeling. So in Baroque music, composers wanted to express emotion very clearly. This was called the doctrine of affections. Remember this word, affections. The idea that music should move the listener's emotions like joy, sadness, anger, or love, and so on. Now, let's hear an example. Italian composer Antonio Vivaldi's Spring from the Four Seasons. Listen for how the music paints the sounds of spring, like birds, rain. Let's do a direct comparison before we move on. So the Renaissance music and Baroque music, what is different? What is different? In Renaissance, the imitative polyphony, so having independent voices weaving together and moving independently, but into the Baroque music, greater use of homophony, which is clear melody and having bass. Do you remember the basso continuo? Okay. So the melody and the accompaniment, its separation is important. And Baroque music also had polyphony, but the difference is Baroque music, there was greater use in the homophony, which was clear melody plus bass. Okay. And their emotion was in the Renaissance period, the emotion was very calm, balanced, because there was a lot of use of vocal music, religious music, which was sacred music. But into the Baroque period, composers focus on the dramatic and expressive use of their music. Okay. The Baroque era gave birth to many new musical genres. Here are just a few: opera, concerto, and oratorio. Okay, first, opera is a musical drama with costumes, acting, and scenery, and some props and like stage effect. And the concerto is like I said before, a solo instrument and the orchestra, they're having a contrast. It's like a competing competition, contrast between solo instrument and the orchestra. So, for example, if the piece is called Violin Concerto, that piece, there is solo violin and the orchestra. So there are solo parts and the orchestral part, and the part, all of them play together. And oratorio is it's like an opera, but without acting. It's like without like props, without stage effects, just people stand and then sing. Like sacred musical drama without staging. Okay, I'll explain one by one. Opera first. Shoop. Opera is like a play, but all the dialogue and story are sung instead of spoken. So all the like syllables, they have pitches. Okay. So it combines music, drama, costumes, and stage design, everything. It's like a musical. It started in Italy around the 1600, aiming to bring ancient Greek drama back to life through music. So famous early composers, we have Monteverdi and later Handel. And operas can be very emotional and very dramatic, which was very perfect for the Baroque love of expression and contrast, right? Second, concerto. A concerto is a piece for a solo instrument, like a violin or a keyboard, accompanied by an orchestra, like I explained before. And it usually has three movements. So one concerto consists of three parts. Each part is called movement. So the first movement is fast, usually. Second movement is slow tempo. And the third movement is also fast. So fast, slow, fast, usually. And it shows off the skill of the soloist and the beauty of the orchestra working together. So have you heard of the word virtuoso? They show the solo performers, they show off their skill, like da, 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 da. Yeah, that's the concerto. Composers like the Vivaldi, Bach wrote many concertos. And the soloist and orchestra often talk to each other, sometimes competing, sometimes cooperating. That's the beauty of the concertos. Third, the oratorio. An oratorio is like an opera, but without costumes, sets, or acting. It's usually a concert piece. Oratorios are based on religious stories, often from the Bible. The most famous oratorio composer is Handel. Think of his famous Messiah. We'll hear it later. They include solo singers, choir, and orchestra. So oratorios were a way to enjoy drama and storytelling without going to the theater. So all three forms, opera, concerto, and oratorio, show the Baroque love for drama, emotion, and musical contrast, but each has a unique way of telling a story or showing off musical skill. So let's hear the short clip from Handel's Messiah. In this work, there are many numbers, many pieces. So we're gonna hear one of them, the famous one, the most renowned one, the Hallelujah Chorus, sung by the Gracious Choir. So Baroque instruments. Before I mentioned how they developed instruments, yeah, invented even. So violin, because of its virtuosity, they're like, yeah, technique. The violin becomes a star in the Baroque period. And we have the harpsichord, the keyboard before the piano, the what can I say? The ancestor of the piano today. And we have recorder and a trumpet. You If you can notice, this trumpet is a little different from the nowadays trumpet. In nowadays, trumpet has this valves, but in this period, trumpet was what we call natural trumpet. So it was slightly different. And we have organ here. Organ was used in sacred music because organ was in churches. Mhm. So now that we know what Baroque music sounds like, let's explore the life and music of Johann Sebastian Bach, one of the greatest composers of all time. You see, this is Johann Sebastian Bach, J.S. Bach as short. Okay, this composer. He is one of the greatest composers in the entire history of Western music, entire history. Okay. He lived from 1685 to 1750, right at the heart of the Baroque period. Bach was born and spent most of his life in Germany, working mostly in churches and courts, writing music to inspire worship and showcase the power of music itself. Okay. He is from a musician family, so he learned how to play instruments and how to compose from his father. And Bach wrote music mostly for keyboard instruments, like the organ and harpsichord, and mostly for choirs in church. Okay, and he was fascinated with musical forms that allowed him to explore complex ideas such as the fugue. We'll talk about it later, and chorale, and he has many sacred works like cantatas, passion, and masses. Yeah, he was so prolific. He composed over 1,000 pieces. Is it written here? Look at the slides. Okay. Mastery of counterpoint, complex harmonies, emotional depth. He's like a genius. He was considered the greatest composer of all time, influenced the future generation composers. Yeah. And fun facts about J.S. Bach. He had over 20 children, and he really loved coffee. He actually wrote a cantata about coffee. There is a coffee cantata composed by him. And one of the famous works is the Well-Tempered Clavier for the keyboard and Brandenburg concertos and Mass in B minor, St. Matthew Passion, Six Suites for solo cello, and many, many more. So now let's dive deep into one of Bach's greatest musical achievements, the fugue. The fugue is often called one of the most complex and fascinating forms in music history. It's a little difficult to understand, but please hear. It's like a musical puzzle, carefully built with many, many layers. So, what exactly is a fugue? At its core, a fugue starts with a single melody. You see, the subject, like red marked subject, one voice or musical line plays this melody alone at first, alone. Then another voice, the answer, enters and plays the same melody, but starting at a different pitch. And a third voice enters, and then a fourth, and sometimes even like more. So each voice imitates the first, but all together they create rich, complex texture. They're not random. They're carefully built at following the principle of counterpoint. These voices don't just repeat the melody exactly. They weave around each other, sometimes overlapping, sometimes playing slightly different versions. It's like a conversation between friends where everyone is saying the same idea but in a new way. So imagine building a tower with blocks. Each block carefully placed so it fits perfectly, and the tower gets taller and more beautiful with each new block. That's how a fugue works musically. So now let's listen to an excerpt from Bach's famous Little Fugue in G minor for organ. So listen carefully and try to notice when the first voice starts playing the main melody is called subject, and when the second voice joins in with the same melody, which was the answer, and how the voices come together to create a full texture. So the fugues are like architectural masterpieces of music. They show perfect balance and order, but also constant movement and energy. Bach was the true master at combining strict rules of composition with lively, expressive music that feels like it's alive and breathing. And fugues are not only for organ. Bach wrote fugues for keyboard, orchestra, and choir, violin, and stuff. So his work on fugues influenced composers for centuries and is still studied by musicians today. Now, let's explore more important parts of Bach's music, the chorale and his sacred vocal works. Just try to remember its names, okay? Chorales and stuff. So the chorale is a simple hymn sung by the congregation in Lutheran churches during Bach's time. So these melodies were well known to churchgoers and were easy to sing. What Bach did was take these simple choral melodies and harmonize them, meaning he wrote beautiful, rich chords and harmonies around the tune, often for four parts: soprano, alto, tenor, and bass. So this created moving, powerful arrangements like this that made familiar hymns sound new and profound. So, unlike the complexity of the fugues, chorales have a calm and steady texture, which creates a feeling of peace and reflection. So, beyond chorales, Bach wrote many large sacred works that combined choir, solo singers, and orchestra to tell Bible stories or explore religious themes. These works include cantatas, passions, and masses. Cantatas are short, sacred works used during Lutheran church services, combining chorales, recitatives, like speech-like singing, recitativo in Italian, and arias, solo songs. And second, we have passion, large-scale dramatic works telling the story of suffering and death of Jesus Christ, such as the famous Saint Matthew Passion, Saint John Passion, and stuff. And third, masses. Missa and masses are settings of the Latin Mass used in Catholic worship, but adapted by Bach in his own style. So Bach's sacred music is deeply emotional and carefully structured. He used chorales as foundations and then built around them with complex and instrumental writing, conveying both the drama and the devotion of the stories. For example, here is a short excerpt from Bach's St. Matthew Passion. Listen to the interplay between the choir, soloists, and instruments as the story unfolds. So, to sum up this section, Bach's fugues, his chorales, and sacred works. In the sacred works, we have cantata, passion, and mass. So Bach's music remains some of the most powerful and inspiring in the classical tradition, combining technical mastery with heartfelt spirituality. So finally, let's enjoy one of Bach's most beautiful instrumental works, Air on the G string. Let's summarize what we learned today. The Baroque era, which lasted from 1600 to 1750, focused on drama, contrast, and emotion. And music became more complex and more expressive. J.S. Bach was a master of structure. His works include fugue, chorale, and sacred music. What were the three of the sacred music? The cantata, passion, mass. And instruments like violin, organ, harpsichord became more important. Shortly, just think, instrumental music became more important than before. Baroque music was meant to move your heart and soul. Okay? Good job. Good job today, everyone. See you next time.